Let's play a little game. The name of this game is called a thought experiment. Thought experiments are really common in science. They're not theory as such. It's just something that people who inclined to think. And they say, well, it goes like this. If A is true and B is also true, and if we understand the relationship between A and B, with a little bit of supposing and whereas and wherefore, we also might get that C is true. And that these three things together, connected as dots, point to an outcome D. So there's a little bit of hand waving and a little bit of supposing, and take it as given or assume for the moment, and you get to an outcome. And in science, we sometimes call those things theories. Okay, that I have a theory now, that based upon observations, based upon how these things seem to interact and how they might connect and point to other things, I have a theory. Now, lots of people have theories about things. People have theories that UFOs are real. People have theories that the Earth is flat. All right, so we're all kind of doing this all the time. Thought experiment. Maybe. What if? Whereas. All right. So I get up this morning and I see the headlines. And there's one that strikes me as important. And it got me thinking while I was in bed, half asleep, thinking about what that particular headline might mean. Okay. And the headline was that experts estimate that 500 million people in India have had coronavirus, the pathogen that has given us the current pandemic here in 2021. So I ran that through in my mind, what that actually means, in conjunction with a lot of other data that are out there. Anybody can collect the same data and come to this similar conclusions as I do. So I'm going to share that thought experiment with you. And for this video, I think I'm going to use this as a jump off for a series. How it all ends. If you happen to be paying any attention to this channel and the videos I've been making for the last year, you'll notice the thread that certain things are not going forward, that we're at the end of a particular episode of, well, how it all ends would be the end of that episode. And let me explain what how it all ends means, what that means. It, in this case, is the human world, which is not the same thing as the natural world. There's a lot of overlap. We're nature. Okay, so we're, what happens to us also happens to the natural world because we're part of that. But the human world is a bunch of compromises, abstractions, deals, finances, governance, a whole bunch of stuff that is actually sort of removed from the natural world. That's it. How it. All in this utilization means all of that. Whatever the human world is, as big and as cumbersome and unwieldy as it is, and what it means, and what history is written about it, how far back that history goes, all. And ends means how it fails to go forward. It doesn't. There's lots of ways that it could end. And I'm going to use this series as an opportunity to explore in thought experiments, data-driven thought experiments, on how it all ends. All right. Shall we begin? So this is going to be kind of a stream of consciousness thing. This is how thought experiments work. So follow along. If you need to go out and verify any of the suppositions or data or anything else, feel free to do so. The headline was that 500 million people in India are estimated to have contracted coronavirus. Now, India is a large country. I mean, it's really big. It's also a mishmash of heavily urban, slums, suburbs, and heavily rural areas. It's I don't. It's an advanced nation. It's an industrialized nation. It's a developing nation. They don't have all the things they really need during a pandemic. So, uh, meaning they don't have copious hospitals everywhere. They don't have means of transportation. They can't get ambulances to everybody. Everybody who gets sick doesn't know they're sick. They're not in the loop. They don't understand that there's a pandemic or that they might have that. And then when people die, there's really they die at home, right? No one came and got them and took them to the hospital and plugged them into an IV and took their name and serial number and all that stuff and then dutifully reported them to some central database. They're home, they're sick. Maybe they went home because they were feeling sick. They were in the city, they felt sick, they felt really ill, so they went home. They took the bus. They were on the bus with all these people. Some of them were also sick, and they get to their village and they're home, and then they die. All right. So the problem with coronavirus pandemic in India is that no one really knows for a fact who's sick, where they are, whether they were covered, whether they had any other problems that may have, caused them. Like, coronavirus can cause organ damage, so kidney failure, liver failure, brain damage, right? Blood clots, strokes, all kinds of things. It's very damaging. Don't kid yourself. It's not just the sniffles. And if you're not in a hospital getting all of this, what they call supportive care, then you may die of something that doesn't even look like a coronavirus. Kidney failure, stroke, brain damage, okay? Or you may come out of it so brain damaged or internally damaged that you can't hold your job anymore. You can't feed yourself. You and your family, your whole family might die. An entire family might die if a breadwinner suddenly can't make money or can't work the fields or whatever. So there's could be all kinds of mortality associated with this thing that goes completely unreported. I mean, and not just because it's a secondary effect, but because it's rural, there's no communications, there's no hospital, there's no hospitalization, and so on. So we've been watching India's ramp up of the pandemic, and it's extremely alarming. It's like the worst case scenario for epidemiologists. Worst case scenario is happening right now in India. Easily predicted. Lots of people said it was going to happen, and it did. But we don't know really how many people are getting sick from it, or conversely, how many people are dying from it. There's just no data, and maybe there never will be. But the experts got together, and it was reported today that they think now that 500 million people, 500 million people may have been exposed to the virus, sick with the virus. Okay, well, that's fine, right? They get over it, right? They go to the hospital, they get ventilated, they get oxygen, whatever. Well, it turns out that the healthcare system has collapsed. They've run out of oxygen in India as of, I guess, last week. It's just getting worse as their system collapses under the load. And of course, when people can't get oxygen, they go home. When people can't get into the hospital, they go home. When people can't get an ambulance, they don't leave home. They just stay home. So a lot of this stuff is just completely under the radar. Now, if you allow, thought experiment, if you allow that India has about 1.5 billion people, okay, then 500 million people estimated is a third of the population. And that's a lot of people have been sick with the virus. I wish I could pull up a number for how many people we think have been infected in the US. It probably isn't a third, but it's probably a sizable part of the population. And of course, we're vaccinating people. So some people probably won't get it. Another topic, but that's the plan, right? That is the plan. So a third of the population in India has had the virus. If we allow that the number of people that die from the virus is 3%. Now, in the US currently it's 2%. It was 3% for a long time, okay? But let's say that in India it's a little bit rougher. Okay, you're not getting the quality of care. You're not getting oxygen, certainly as of this week. So most people never went to a hospital at all. They never got anything, nothing at all. Okay, so between the things that never happened and the things that aren't going to happen going forward, let's say that the fatality rate is similar to the U.S. right now. And ours is about 2%. Maybe theirs is 3%. So I did some math here. You can do the math on your own. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I got 45 million dead. 45 million dead. Does that make sense? Maybe I should do that math again. How do you do this math? I think that was the entire population. Let's do just the 500,000. 500 million. 500 million on my calculator times 0.03. It's giving me scientific notation. 1.6 15 million. Yeah, that makes more sense. So 15 million. But the 45 million is what if the entire country gets the virus and it stays at 3% fatality rate? So 15 million people dead. 15 million people dead. Other data that you're going to get from watching the news is they're burning bodies in India 24 hours a day. The crematoria, they're just big open lots with brick funeral pyres on the ground, and they just put the bodies in and they cover them with wood and they burn them 24 hours a day to keep up with the bodies. Because people do die, and when people die, it doesn't matter if they're in some shanty town or in the rural areas or even in the middle of a big city. Even if they're not counted, people are going to have to do something with the bodies, so they burn the bodies. That's their reality. It's pretty stark, pretty horrific, especially now that they're starting to run out of even the very basics, like hospitals are packed, ambulances have nowhere to go, and they're running out of oxygen, which is a very basic for dealing with the respiratory problems that come with coronavirus. There's other problems, but the respiratory part is the one that kills you first. So now they don't have oxygen anymore for anybody. So they're halfway through their pandemic. I say halfway through because a third of the country, by estimates, have been exposed to the virus. The vaccination program is a joke. I'm sure the elites got it. You know, the armed forces, doctors, nurses, maybe the political class, and that'll be it. That'll be it. The elites will get theirs. Okay. I say that they're halfway through because herd immunity, which is natural immunity, whether you have a vaccine or not, happens at about 2/3. So 1/3 of the country has had the virus, and about 2/3 we're looking at herd immunity, maybe. I mean, that's just classic epidemiology. We kind of don't know how coronavirus is going to behave. It may take more than that. There's already some grumbling that herd immunity may be more at like 80% or 90% because this thing is so contagious. But let's say they're halfway through. Let's say they're halfway through. So according to the estimates, they're halfway through, and according to the estimates, we really don't know. We don't have the numbers out of India. 15 million people have died. And on the ground, there is evidence that these are all true. All these things are true. So they're only halfway through this. Another half will have 2/3 of the population having been exposed to the virus, and 30 million people dead. 30 million people dead. So let's carry this forward a little bit, shall we? 30 million people dead. Mostly underprivileged, lower caste, rural, laborers, okay, but let's be realistic. It's going to sweep up a lot of ambulance drivers, right? Cab drivers, shopkeepers, teachers, police, military, all kinds of first responders, and also the people who are managing the funeral pyres, right? Everybody who's handling the bodies, putting them out there, putting the wood around them, they're all going to be exposed to the virus from the bodies and the corpses. So, okay, so we're going to get to 2/3 of the population affected, 3% of those people dead, 30 million people dead. Now, India's a big country. It's big in terms of lots of people. It's also big in geography. So 30 million people can be pretty well spread out. But that many people, okay, in a country that is a developing country, you really run the risk of knocking the bottom right out of your national functionality, okay? And it's not just the loss of people, the loss of teachers and police and fire and doctors and nurses and all that, which is tragic enough and damaging enough all by itself, just the loss of those people, but also the terror, just the horror of so many people dying, where you don't even know a family that didn't have death in their family, and there's no community that hasn't been impacted. There isn't any place in India that didn't have 24-hour-a-day cremations, and shops closed because the shopkeeper either died or is afraid to serve people. Why open the shop? The next person come in could be on the verge of death and transmit the virus to you and kill you. So they may just close their shops, and that means food supplies, certainly, restaurants, fast foods, these kinds of things, but all kinds of services that people need. Shops just close. And at some point, when the first responders see that their ranks are being decimated, they stop responding. They may not respond to anything. They may simply go home and wait it out. They may not respond to fires, to medical emergencies, criminal acts, widespread violence. Just don't respond to any of it. Why throw your body in at the front of the line to be murdered? Just don't stop doing it. And the nurses and the doctors, same story. When their hospitals are completely knocked out, and the mob is coming and wanting help, and their families are dying, and they don't understand why they can't get in the hospital. They start ransacking the hospitals and setting fire to the ambulances. They stop. There's no oxygen. There's no supportive care. There's no ventilators. They can't do anything for you. And we've run out of vaccines. What are we doing here? Why are we even here? And they go home. And they're not there for any purpose. Not for women that want to give birth in a hospital, not for broken bones, not for tuberculosis, not for an infection, not for a hangnail. They're just not there for anything. So very slowly, the layers of your local civilization, your national identity, start to unravel. It just starts to slice pieces of your infrastructure off, and it just stops functioning. So then what happens? At some point, no one's lighting the funeral pyres anymore. No one's bringing in the wood from the forest. Maybe they've cut down all the trees that they could get to. Maybe it's done. What now? Everyone's staying home. No one's going out and yet then there's a dead person in your house. Now what? You get on the phone. No one answers the phone. You bundle your loved one up into a sheet, and you take them down to that lot where they've been burning bodies 24/7, and you go through the gate, and there's all these ashes and all this burnt wood, and you bring your body, and there's no one there. Wherever that was, whatever they're getting paid, why they were doing that, they've stopped. And there's no wood. You can't even burn the body yourself. What do? You're not going to take it back to the house. You leave it. And then the word gets around. There's no one burning bodies anymore. There's no wood. Bring your own wood. Bring your furniture, bring your, whatever you've got, bring a wall out of your house, something, and burn that body yourself. Or they just stop doing that. People just stop taking the bodies down to the lot where they're burning bodies 24 hours a day. You just haul them out in the street, leave them in the street. Maybe everyone in the house is too sick to do anything more than that, if that. And so pretty soon, you're going to work, you're going to the only market that's open for 2 hours a day, and you're making your way through the city, and there's bodies here and there's bodies there, and there's this smell of death everywhere. Bodies being burned on the roadside, bodies being burned in the middle of the street using whatever is flammable, car tires, gasoline, whatever they can lay their hands on. And if you really are a shopkeeper or a teacher or an ambulance driver or somebody, got a little bit of money, maybe you've got some family in the UK, possibility. Maybe you got some family in Europe, and maybe you got some family in in the US, some son or daughter who's working in Silicon Valley, right? And you've got some money, you're a shopkeeper, you've been a taxi driver, whatever, you've got some money, your kids are doing okay. You had enough money, wherewithal, to get your kids through school, through college, and off to the United States to code for Cisco or Apple or whatever, right? So you had all that going on. So you sent your kids over there. Now look what's happening. Now you got to get out of India. And you have a child who can anchor you. So you're very quietly in India getting your passport together and your visas and of course, your vaccinations, because you're not going to be able to get into the country easily without some sort of vaccination record. So you get all that stuff worked out, and then your child working in the UK or working in America wires you the $600 to get on a plane, and you leave. You tell the neighbors, maybe we'll be back when this is over. In the meantime, if you'd watch the house, we'd appreciate it. But you don't know what you're going to come back to. You could come back and the house be empty or occupied by somebody else. You have no idea. This may be it. You're leaving, and this might be it. You're kind of like a refugee. You might be a teacher or a professional or a college professor, or, a doctor or a nurse, and you're leaving your country, and maybe you're starting over. Maybe you're never going to come back. And as the people who can leave do that, because they have the resources to get the plane ticket, to get the passport, to bribe the officials, to get the last vaccine, whatever it takes to pull that all together, whatever work, bribery, corruption, whatever it takes to pull all that together, they can do it. And they are the leaders of your nation. They might even be the political class of your nation. They're getting out. And that leaves everybody else to fend for themselves. Plus, you've got how many millions of people that are now in this diaspora out of India, headed for some place that isn't, a waking nightmare, with literal bodies in literal streets, literally on fire. Now, it will be a very quiet diaspora. And, people are not going to say, well, I'm going to the US to escape from the pandemic and the ravages of the coronavirus in India. They're not going to say that. They'll say that among themselves, among their family, among the insiders, but they're not going to tell their neighbors that. But on the other hand, that's what they are. They're leaving. And they'll come to the US and they'll have their money and they'll have their kids living here who have good jobs, paying jobs, and they'll move in with their daughter, or they'll move in with their son, or they're moving with another Indian family who also has fled India. And they just kind of combine resources and they go live in this apartment somewhere. Maybe there's 3 families living there, okay? And, they get established, they've got some money, maybe they got a kid who's willing to pay the bills. It's rough, but, it's mom and dad, plus the cousins and the, aunt and uncle, and trying to take care of as many people as we can here. So very quietly, tens of thousands of people start showing up unexpectedly. Well, unexpectedly if you're not paying attention to what's happening in India. And they'll be in the UK, and they'll be in, west coast of North America, and they'll be in, uh, uh, Europe, France, Germany, maybe. I don't know. They're not all that friendly to foreigners, but maybe somewhere there. And wherever they end up, there'll just be a lot of people. Now they'll have money. That's how they were able to pull all that off, right? They had money. So they'll have money, and they'll be buying up homes, and they'll be, making new homes for themselves. And unfortunately, disrupting things as they go. No fault of theirs. I'm not holding anybody accountable for anything they have to do to survive or to improve their situation. You got to do what you got to do. But when they start, showing up here in the South Bay, and they're looking for apartments to rent, houses to buy, whatever it takes, right? Then that becomes a price signal. And pretty soon there's, people trying to find houses, scrambling around, paying cash, renting, driving up the price of things. And you're wondering, what is going on? Well, that's it. That's how it happened. But that's just the first wave. The second wave is then the people in India who don't have the means. Either they don't have the money, or they don't have enough money, or they don't have existing connections overseas, okay, who can kind of get them established, get them in and established. So the common man, the middle class, maybe even the upper middle class, plus, of course, everyone who isn't that in India. Now, India is in a difficult position. They have the Himalayan mountains to the north, which are unpassable. There's no way to go. There's no way to go north. If you could, you'd have China and Russia and I don't know, Afghanistan, but you can't get there. You can't cross the mountains. To the east, you have Southeast Asia, which has its own set of problems. Not a place you can think, unless again you have connections there. Maybe you're a businessman, an Indian businessman who has business in Malaysia, possibly, okay, or Thailand, Bangkok. In which case, maybe it's easy. But for a lot of people, that's not going to be the answer, is to go into Southeast Asia. That's just not going to be the answer. India shares a border on the west with Pakistan. There's also Iran, Afghanistan, of course, the entire Middle East. People might go that way. Now, India is not on good terms with Pakistan. There are a lot of Pakistanis who used to be Indian citizens, so you'd think that they would be welcoming of their Indian brothers and sisters during a time of crisis, but that's not going to be the case. And when the Indian people, by the millions, we're talking 30 million people here over the next year, 6 months, all right? 30 million people on the move. No, I'm sorry, 30 million people dead. How many people on the move? How about 100 million people on the move? That's less than 10% of the country. How about 10% of the country on the move? I think that's realistic. So that's 150 million people on the move. 150 million people on the move. That's half the U.S. population on the move. It's the equivalent of half the U.S. population on the move, with very few places to go to do that. There's a sea route. About half of the Indian border with the world is with the sea, the Indian Ocean. So boats, right? Fishing vessels, trawlers, cargo ships, anything that can make way in the sea would be able to take people off. So we would have boat people, right? And where would they go? Well, there's island nations. There's Indonesia, Singapore, and all of Southeast Asia, Malaysia, Thailand, Cambodia, Vietnam. Boats could reach these places. Africa is fairly close. Boats from India could reach Africa, and of course the Persian Gulf. So Iran, Iraq, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, UAE. You wouldn't want to do Yemen. That's a war zone. But anyway, it's there. So you could have boats, but at some point the boats are gone. We're not making new boats in India. We're just using boats, and anything that can go to sea will go to sea. And once again, probably it's the elites, people with money who can buy the boat, buy passage on the boat, some combination of things, and they will be able to get out. The common people won't be able to get out. The boats will leave with the moneyed class, the privileged class, just as the airplanes left with the super privileged class. And everyone else is on foot. So they head for Pakistan, and they get to the border. And maybe the military is still functioning. Maybe the military is at the border with Pakistan. They're not on good terms. Maybe the military has always been at the border of Pakistan. And now some portion of 150 million people shows up trying to get out of the nightmare that is India. They get to the border, and Pakistan closes the border. No, you can't come in here. First of all, you're diseased. Second, you're Hindus. And third, you would overwhelm us. You would bring your problems, the things you're fleeing, starvation, lack of services, no care for the children, no hospitalization, a nation racked with death, meaning just on the ground in front of you all the time, just dead bodies, putrefying, rotting in the streets. You're going to bring all that to little Pakistan, a nation that's 1/5 your size, or a tenth of your size. You can't come in. You can't come in unless you have relatives here, or business associates here, or some way to buy your way in. You can't come in. And so now we have some portion of 150 million people, maybe most of them, because I don't think Southeast Asia is going to be any more welcoming, on the border with Pakistan. And that leads to war. Because the Indian military is going to be saying, let our people go through. And the Pakistani military is going to say, go pound sand. And as soon as a bunch of Indian citizens trying to force their way through a border crossing into Pakistan, they're going to kill them. They're going to kill them with automatic weapons, tanks, armored personnel carriers, jets, the whole thing. And the Indian military will respond in kind. And then there will be, India and Pakistan both have nuclear weapons. Will they use nuclear weapons? Let's say they don't, shall we? Let's just say they don't. But tensions are high, and Russia gets involved. China gets involved. China would like to actually take over India and claim it as as another Tibet. Will China make a move? Will China come into India, land troops, humanitarian troops, to help control the country as it collapses, basically to take over, Soviet Union style? Where does all this go? Well, it could just keep escalating. And the whole point of this thought experiment, this data-driven thought experiment, is that this is how it all ends. So you can pretty easily see that as the wealthy people spread out into the world, bringing disruption with them, no fault of their own. I'm not saying that's wrong. I'm saying they don't have a choice, okay? As the rest of the people left behind either tough it out in India, living through a daily nightmare, or they just hoof it to the nearest border, the nearest ship, the nearest crossing into another country, whatever. All this disruption spreads out into the world, spreads out into Africa, it spreads into Southeast Asia. It ends up in Australia. It ends up in the Middle East. It finds its way into Europe, finds its way into North America, finds its way into South America, on boats, on planes, on whatever. And these are dislocated people with disrupted lives. They need to start completely over. And they're going to go into situations where they are not wanted. And once it's discovered that this is what's happening, nations are going to start closing their borders and shutting down air traffic. And no, you can't come here. You can't come here from India. And you also can't come here from Pakistan. And you can't come here from Malaysia. And you can't come here from Germany if you've come from India. We're not taking any more air traffic. And when we had 1 million Syrians doing the same thing into Europe several years back, The EU nearly collapsed. That gave us Brexit, and indirectly, the movement of 1 million Syrians into Europe gave us Donald Trump. As all these populist movements and nativist movements started rearing their heads, saying, no, this country's for us, it's not for you. And that's where a lot of that stuff came from. So what's going to happen when not 1 million Syrians, who are practically European, they live on the Mediterranean, they have ties to the Turks, who are part of NATO, right? As soon as 150 million Indians, even the rich ones, start making their way out into the world to try and escape this colossal, horrendous thing, they're going to bring disruption with them. And I cannot overemphasize this is not their fault. And I'm not just saying that to be politically correct. It is not their fault. This is the world as we have constructed it. This is the human world. It is fragile. It is not resilient. It collapses easily. We are overextended on the planet Earth. We are too many in too fragile an arrangement. And we've seen with the pandemic itself, all of this can collapse. And it has, in many places, in many ways, been completely shaken to the foundations. We're not out of the woods yet, by any means at all. And it finally came to India. And after India, maybe Pakistan. Maybe the same infectious rate moves right into Pakistan. Maybe Pakistan is completely disrupted by the events in India. Maybe Myanmar, Burma, Bangladesh, completely disrupted by events taking place in India. Maybe even Indonesia is completely disrupted by events taking place in India. We could be looking at civil wars in all these other places. Not that they don't have some of that going on already, but it could get worse, right? And does the developed so-called first world rise to this occasion? Do we open our doors and let them in the least disruptive way possible, as refugees, as people who deserve to be taken care of? Do we bring them in? Do we make camps for them? Put their children in schools, give them all the medical care they need? Do we, open up our treasury to help these people get settled? Do we build them little towns just for them? It's 150 million people, and that's only 10% of the population. What if it ends up being 25% of the population is on the move? It's unlikely. 150 million people is bad enough. And all this would happen over 6 to 12 months. Now, it's just a thought experiment. None of it may happen like this. The people may simply hunker down, tough it out, take their losses, deal with the dead bodies, deal with the lack of services, cope as best they can, and, start to rebuild after a year or two of just enduring hardship. Maybe they don't go anywhere. And maybe there's these horror stories that come out of India with bodies piled up, 10, 20 feet high to put the last 20 gallons of gas on them and set them on fire. Maybe there's huge trenches full of bodies that they couldn't burn because they ran out of fuel. They just threw them in a ditch. Just dispose of them, essentially. Don't know. But that's the lay of the land right now. That's how this is playing out. Now, does the human world, does our civilization, our global industrialized civilization, so-called, survive this? What's happening in India? I don't know. I just laid out a bunch of points, a bunch of connected dots on how that maybe doesn't work out. So, how it all ends, that's one scenario. It's playing itself out right now in the headlines. We'll see. I guess we'll see. It's not a pretty picture. I'm not looking forward to it. But that's one scenario. Just a thought experiment. Okay? Don't worry about it too much.